Um, okay, I'm going to pick up where we left off fairly briefly. I hope this is where we left off because, again, I might be confusing you with my Tuesday, Thursday class. In the foreword to the second edition, bottom of Roman numeral page 23, right? Talked a little bit Monday about, Tolkien's motive for writing this, right? And then he goes on at the very bottom of that page, talking about, the inner meaning or message. And he says, as for any inner meaning or message, it has in the intention of the author none. I think I talked about, he didn't sit out and try to smuggle Catholic theology, into people's minds. And I mentioned how C.S. Lewis kind of did with his Christian theology. So, he says, as he wrote, the story kind of threw out its own roots and grew in the telling. And it's kind of interesting, if you've ever listened to writers or read what writers say about the process of writing, storytelling. Stephen King, for example, says, kind of the way he begins a story is he throws a bunch of characters kind of in a room, in a setting, and then lets them go at it. Now, not being a writer, I look at that and I kind of go, what? What do you mean you let him go at it? Because he's kind of implying what about those characters? They kind of write themselves, or it's kind of like they're real. And he just, he's an observer. He sits behind and watches what they do, right? Tolkien's saying something very similar. He's sitting there, writing over the years, and something pops up in his mind, and he writes it. And then because of the kind of person he is, he has to figure out what or who that is. And he starts to develop it, okay? For example, when he wrote The Hobbit, he had no idea, essentially, what the ring was. But it's from The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings that the ring becomes very, very, very important. I mean, yeah, it's important in The Hobbit. It's a magical ring, but he doesn't fully know. It's only in the writing of this that it becomes the one ring of power. It controls, destiny, that kind of thing, okay? So he goes on and says, it is neither allegorical nor topical. So, allegorical. What's an allegory? Anybody know? What does allegory mean?
Like an encounter situation that's representative of something real, but isn't in itself.
Kind of. I saw a hand up.
It's like a story with an underlying alternate perspective or meaning.
Okay, kind of. It is a story with a meaning, okay? But the meaning is the most important thing about the story, rather than the telling of the story, or rather than the characters and what happens to the characters. In an allegory, and the greatest allegory in the English language is a novel written in the 17th century by John Bunyan called Pilgrim's Progress. Okay? The title starts to give away a little bit of the allegory or the allegorical meaning. The main character in Pilgrim's Progress is a young man named Christian. Christian never stands for, never represents Buddhist, Jew, Muslim, Zoroastrian. Pick your religion. Christian can only refer to Christians. And the whole progress just means a journey, kind of a journey forward, upwards. The whole progress is to the celestial city, heaven. And it's all about the quote-unquote Christian life down here to up there, okay? It can only be read one way. You can't pick up Pilgrim's Progress and try to read it any other way than John Bunyan wants you to read it, Okay? Tolkien didn't like that kind of stuff. He's going to say on the next page, I cordially dislike it. Cordially means with all my heart. But it's a nice, gentlemanly way of putting it, okay? The reason he doesn't like it, the main reason he doesn't like it, is because it takes away our freedom as readers. And it makes the author God. God, not in his Catholic theological understanding of God, but in this kind of modern sense of God saying, you will do X, Y, Z. Okay? Tolkien doesn't like that. He realizes every one of us brings something to what we read. And what we bring helps make the meaning of what it is we're reading. Okay? So I bring something to the Lord of the Rings that's different than every one of you. And each one of you brings something differently than every other person in this room. Okay? It doesn't mean how we each read it is equally valid. Because some of us can read wrongly. All right? So, he says it's not allegorical. That is, now he's writing this preface. This foreword gets published in 1965 with the second edition. Between the publication in 1954 to 56 of the first edition to the second edition, awful lot of people had written about the Lord of the Rings. Dissertations had been written, which Tolkien really thought was weird and odd. Why would anybody write a dissertation on my stuff? His stuff. A lot of articles had been written, et cetera, and a lot of people suggested meanings for things like the ring. And probably the most common reading of the ring was its atomic weapons. That's what it's supposed to represent. And the whole War of the Ring is kind of the Second World War and beginning of the Cold War told in fantasy. No, Tolkien is saying here. It's not allegorical. The ring does not equal the atomic bomb. Nor is it, he says, topical. That is, it's not based on the immediate events of the time in which I was writing it. And he's going to go on and say, if it was topical, guess what would happen to Mordor? Now, show me hands again. How many of you have read this? Put them way up. Only a few. How many of you have seen the films? Okay. What happens to Mordor at the end? Let's jump to the end of the novel. It's pretty much destroyed, right? Barad-dûr, the Tower of Sauron, falls and is destroyed, and Sauron, blows away and all this kind of stuff. He says, if it were topical, if it were essentially based on the Second World War, what would happen to Sauron? What happened in the Second World War to the defeated combatants? Germany, Italy, Japan, etc. They were occupied. They were taken over. What happened to, not all, many of the German scientists?
They were repatriated to other countries. Now, I say that in big quotation marks.
Okay.
Repatriated.
They were brought into other countries. I'll give you a name. You may be familiar with it, you may not. Werner von Braun. Anybody know who he was?
Did he do the experiments?
No, that was Joseph Mengele. Werner von Braun was a physicist. He developed the German V1 and V2 rockets that were used to, partially at least, bombard England. When we won the Second World War, we, United States, brought Werner von Braun over to the United States. Why? We want those rockets. He became part of NASA. Neil Armstrong would never have set foot on the moon if we had not brought Werner von Braun here. Okay? And yet he was pretty active in the the German military effort against the Allies. That's what Tolkien says the Allies would have done in this novel. They wouldn't have destroyed Sauron and his land. They would have done what? They would have kept him alive. They would have used the ring for their own. They would have learned the technology. And we kind of be where we are today. Okay? So, it's not topical, it's not allegorical. Go on to the next page. The crucial chapter, and I think I mentioned this yesterday. There are two crucial chapters in the first volume. First volume being Fellowship of the Ring. Yeah. Okay? Two of them. The first one is the second chapter of book 1. Fellowship of the Ring is divided, remember, into 2 books, book 1 and book 2. The second crucial chapter is the second chapter of book 2. Shadow of the Past, chapter 2, book 1, Council of Elrond, chapter 2, book 2. All right? Tolkien says, Shadow of the Past is one of the oldest parts of the tale, written long before the outbreak of World War II. And yet, you can kind of read it and go, prophecy, all kinds of bad, you know what's about to happen, okay? And that's when he goes on and says, the real war, Second World War, does not resemble this war at all. Okay? Skipping a bunch. Middle of that page. He says, you know, there are other ways to read this. According to the taste or views of those who like allegory or topical references. But I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations. He didn't like a lot of what his best friend in the late 20s, 30s, and 40s wrote, C.S. Lewis. Tolkien really didn't like, for example, the Chronicles of Narnia. He thought it was too allegorical. I mean, Aslan is Jesus. But Lewis says, even, he didn't write it, he did not set out to write that allegorically. He wrote that as what he called a supposal. Suppose there was a world where talking animals were really the important thing. How would the incarnation look like there? Suppose the incarnation of Christ here happened in a world where animals were essentially supreme. What would it look like? Well, you couldn't have a human walk in and go, I'm the Son of God, because they're all animals. I mean, it's got to be an animal, right? And you wouldn't make it a mouse, because, so he makes him a lion. By the way, what are lions also? King of the beasts. Okay? What are eagles? King of the air. Little Harry Potter thing for you to start thinking about. Gryffindors, which are part lion, part eagle. Earth, sky, Jesus, Son of God, Son of Man. The novels are packed with that kind of symbolism. Okay? So, Tolkien says, I don't like allegory. What do I like? I like history. Whether real history, in 1776, blah, 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 or in 1066, blah, 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 or feigned history, imaginary history. What do you mean, imaginary history? Give me an example of imaginary history. History that we think is not true. And I don't go all CRTing, the founding of the United States. Something else, something that's real fiction, let's say.
The story of the Fomorians and the Tuatha De Danann.
Pull your mask down so I can understand you.
The story of the Irish Fomorians and Tuatha
Yeah,
De Danann.
good. Okay, story of the founding of Britain from Brutus, son or grandson of Aeneas, son of Priam of Troy, one of the founding legends of England, is that ultimately they're descendants of Trojans. Now, personally, I don't know why you'd want to be descendants of the Trojans, because they lost. You'd want to be descendants of the Greeks, if anything. But that's one. King Arthur, right? Problem with King Arthur is it imaginary or is it real? Imagine how our world, in one sense, I don't have time for this, how our world would change if we found conclusive, 100% undeniable evidence Arthur and Merlin were real. You know, somebody digging somewhere in Cornwall or southern Scotland finds a rock with a sword in it, you know, and it has carved in runic letters, Excalibur, you know, Lady of the Lake made me or something like that. It would, yeah, right? So Tolkien says, either of these are what get me going. He was mentioning before class began, you know, reading a lot of this, it's like reading portions of the Old Testament. Oh, I mean, the historical parts of the Old Testament, okay? And that's because that's what Tolkien loved. That kind of historical stuff. That's one reason why a lot of people who come to the Lord of the Rings after watching the films have a really hard time reading it. Because what are the films?
Action-packed.
What genre would they fit? Don't just say fantasy, because yeah, they're fantasy. They're not this world. What kind of fantasy? Okay, keep going. Keep going. Any of you D&D fans? It's Dungeons and Dragons, man. It's sword and sorcery stuff. According to Peter Jackson. Tolkien would say, no, not at all. A lot of people think, you know, because of the films, Tolkien's this big pro-war guy, pro-military, you know. No, I was on a conference in, what year was that? 2002 in Oxford, a Tolkien conference. And one of the discussions, one of the panels I was on is, you know, does Tolkien valorize, celebrate war? And it was because the first film had come out. No, actually, by that point, the second film, Two Towers, had come out. How many of you remember the film, The Two Towers? Not many of you, okay? Most of the film, I mean that kind of, you know, exaggeratedly, roughly about a fourth of the film is all one place, the Battle of Helm's Deep. Literally about a fourth of the film. Film's a little over 2 hours. Battle of Helm's Deep is about 9 pages of the entire Two Towers. So how do you go from 9 pages, which is less than a 20th, to more than a fourth? CGI, man. I mean, it gives you the opportunity to do all kinds of totally cool stuff. All right? So, Tolkien says, this is what I'm about. And then he goes on and he talks about in one sense, he kind of backtracks on the topical part. He doesn't say it, but it's implied. Because he says in that final paragraph on page Roman numeral 24, he talks about an author cannot, of course, remain wholly unaffected by his experience. But the ways in which a story germ, the foundation idea of a story, right, uses the soil of experience are extremely complex. and attempts to define the process are at best guesses from evidence that is inadequate and ambiguous. That's Tolkien's way of saying people who try to psychoanalyze me based upon my work are morons. Or people who try to say this is the cause of this in the book because of Tolkien's experience don't know what they're talking about. What he is saying, however, is you cannot divorce an author from his or her work. Deconstruction, an idea very prominent in literary circles from the late 1960s on, says, the author is dead. All that's important is what you have in front of you. The author has no control over that. The author can't say anything about the meaning of that. J.K. Rowling has really tried to fight against that idea because she wants to control everything about the Harry Potter stuff. Okay? And I'm going to take shots at her because of things she's done and said in Pottermore that have nothing to do with the actual books that have been produced. Okay? So what's Tolkien's point here? One has indeed personally, middle of that paragraph, one has indeed personally to come under the shadow of war to feel fully its oppression. Okay? Notice the terms there. One has to personally come under the shadow of war. That doesn't mean on the home front, sitting in one's house. He means one has to personally experience, be in the war as he was. Okay? And then he gives us kind of the knockout punch. By 1918, all but one of my close friends were dead. 1918, he was 26. So older than most of you. But imagine for a moment all of your close friends and kill all but one. How would your life be different? And not just, have them all magically disappear, but have them all die in war. What does that do for how you think about war and to be in that war yourself? And Tolkien had to leave the war because he got trench fever. Okay? C.S. Lewis fought in that war. Many of his friends died. Right? Lewis, if I remember correctly, was gassed. One of them. So, anyways, so how does that change not only what you think about war, but what about your outlook on life? Listen to, some of our soldiers who have fought in Iraq and Afghanistan and such. And I'm not talking about what's going on right now. But those that have come back who've been in firefights where they are of a very small few who survived that firefight. What do they often discuss that they feel? Anybody know the phrase? Survivor guilt. Okay? Survivor guilt. And that applies not just to people in war, it applies to, people who survive tornadoes, hurricanes. When the big tornado came through Murfreesboro in 2010, there's a house over on Gresham Lane, and the house is fine. All the houses around it were gone. And there was an interview, with the person in the D&J or something, and they were like, why didn't my house get destroyed? I mean, because they feel guilty that everybody else's houses are gone. People were alive, but, So, Tolkien says, by 1918, all but one of my close friends were dead. And then he talks about the chapter of the Scouring of the Shire. It says it's also one of the most important chapters, and it was foreseen from the outset of the novel. But a lot of people think the Scouring of the Shire is describing England after the war. And he's like, no. And for some reason, Peter Jackson did not think the Scouring of the Shire was important. It's not in the theatrical release. All right? Okay. I'm not going to say anything else about that. I'm not going to talk about the prologue. You can read that on your own. Long expected party. This chapter is titled A Long Expected Party because the first chapter in The Hobbit is titled An Unexpected Party. He's linking the two together there, okay? And I'm not going to say hardly anything about this chapter. If you have questions, eat this stupid mask, fire away. The only thing important about the party is what is its purpose? What is its real purpose? Let me put it that way.
Bilbo to disappear.
For just before that, though, for Bilbo to do what? To get rid of the ring. See, Hobbit custom is when it's your birthday, you give away presents. Okay? So if anybody has a birthday this semester, you're now on the, we're all watching. Okay? So Bilbo invites a bunch of people to his birthday party. How old is Bilbo going to be? Bilbo, 111. How old is Frodo going to be? 33. Together they make 144 or one gross, so he invites 144 people to his party. Why is the date 33 or the year 33 so important? That's the Hobbit age of maturity. It's our equivalent with, I don't know what our equivalent would be. Used to be 18, but now 18-year-olds can't do a lot of stuff because, Congress, they can go and die for the country, but they can't buy a beer. Don't get me started. 111 is because it's not quite the longest a Hobbit has lived, but he's getting up there, okay? So, big party. And Bilbo thinks by giving away all of these gifts to all these people, it'll make it easier for him to give one more away. And that is the ring that he has to Frodo, okay? So they have a big party, Gandalf comes, he says fireworks, blah, blah, blah. But Bilbo doesn't want to leave the ring, does he? Actually, I'm going to talk a little bit more than I thought about it. He leaves the party, goes back to his home, Bag Inn, pages 32 and 33. He tells Gandalf, I've left everything. And Gandalf says, top of page 33. Everything? The ring as well? You agreed, remember? Yes. Gandalf asks, where is it? Notice Gandalf's kind of pushing. It's in an envelope there on the mantle, and then he realized, oh, no, it isn't. Right here in my pocket. Right? So Gandalf says, you're going to leave it behind, right? And Bilbo's like, well, yes, no. And then he starts to get kind of, upset about it. And Bilbo finally says, it is mine, I tell you, my own, my precious. Yes, my precious. And Gandalf's like, it's been called that before, but not by you. Okay? So Bilbo gets even more testy, and he challenges Gandalf and says, if you want the ring yourself, say so. We don't know anything about the ring at this point, right? And Gandalf says, if you say that again, I will get angry. Then you will see Gandalf the Grey uncloaked. And he takes a step towards Bilbo. How big is Bilbo? He's about 3 feet. How big is Gandalf? He's not like 8 feet. He's probably my height, maybe a little taller, maybe 6 foot or so. How old is Gandalf? Old.
He's great.
Really old. Okay? Thousands of years old. Okay? We might get to what Gandalf is. Not today. So, they talk back and forth. Bilbo says, I'm not a thief. Gandalf says, I never said you were. Bilbo, draws his hand over his eyes. It's like he wipes away, the fear and stuff and apologizes. And he says, okay, I'm going to leave the ring. I'm leaving now. Gandalf says, I'm it's still in your pocket. Oh, yeah, you're right. And Bilbo says, here, you take it and deliver it to Frodo. Gandalf, don't give the ring to me. Put it on the mantle, it'll be safe. Okay? Bilbo leaves. Frodo comes in, skipping a bunch. Last 2 pages of the chapter, 40 and 41. Frodo's kind of like, so did he? Did he actually leave it to me? Gandalf's, yes. Frodo's like, well, you know, when Lobelia Sackville Baggins, notice the initials of the last name, by the way, SP, sons of. He said, I thought about putting the ring on. Gandalf, don't do that. Be careful of it, Frodo. Why? What's the problem with the ring? Bilbo used to put it on when he wanted to ditch people. Why can't I? He says, well, you know. I mean, he told me about the story, how he got the ring, and Gandalf says, which story did he tell you? See, after Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings, he rewrote the chapter in The Hobbit about how Bilbo got the ring. He changed it a little bit. That's why if you have a first edition of The Hobbit with the original story, it's worth a lot more than the second edition, which has the revised story. And he deals with the kind of revised story with both stories in here. Pretty damn smart on the part of Tolkien. Okay? So, they start to talk, and Gandalf says, let's talk later. Chapter 2, Shadow of the Past. So it begins, and we find out time has passed from the date of the birthday party. It's coming up, by the way, September 22nd. And page 43, people start to notice, you know, and Frodo, he hasn't changed much. Okay? Not sure why. And we hear Sam Gamgee talking down at the Green Dragon pub with his friends and such, and Ted Sandyman comes in, who's the son of the miller that Bilbo didn't get along with very well. And Gandalf shows up. He'd been away for a long time. You could count the number of years in there. I've got it partially written down. Page 46, top of the page. Gandalf reappears after his long absence. For 3 years after the party, he'd been away. So, 34, 35, 36. All right? Then he paid Frodo a brief visit, went off again. During the next year or two, so put 2, he kind of showed up on and off. Then he stopped coming up entirely. More than 9 years go by. So now 14 years have gone by. So now Frodo's 47 or so. Okay? Then Gandalf shows up again. And they start to talk. And bottom of that page, Frodo says, you said some strange things about my ring last night. You said the ring was dangerous, but you didn't want to talk about that. It's more dangerous than I guess. In what way? Gandalf. In many ways. It is far more powerful than I ever dared to think at first. So powerful. Notice the first real discussion about the ring. So powerful that in the end, it would utterly overcome anyone of mortal race who possessed it. It would possess him. What has Gandalf just told us? Louder? Okay, it has possessed somebody.
And it has the means to possess literally anybody.
Not anybody. Gotta be more. Any mortal, any person of mortal race. That is, if you can die, it can possess you. Elrond is Elrond half-elven. Can Elrond die? Yes. You take a sword and chop his head off, he's going to die. You give him a poison, he's going to die. Can a pure elf, Galadriel, she's 100% elf, right? Yeah. Can she die? Yes, she can. She won't naturally for a very, 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 very long time. Okay? She's a lot older than Elrond. She's like the second generation of elves, going all the way back. I mean, she's thousands of years old, right? What about Frodo? He's immortal. How long do hobbits tend to live? Less than 100 years. That's why it's so odd that Bilbo lived to be 111. So what has Gandalf just told us? Any mortal, he says, it would utterly overcome anyone of mortal race who possessed it. You hold onto the ring long enough, and what will happen? The ring will hold onto you. The ring will own you. He's kind of just foreshadowed the end of the novel. Right? Frodo, most of you have seen the films. I'm not giving this away. What's going to happen? The ring will possess Frodo. Try as hard as he will for it not to. Gandalf says, anyone of mortal race. That includes him. You can kill Gandalf. Okay? And so he starts to give us the history of the rings. All right? Rings of power. And then he says, top of page 47, a mortal Frodo who keeps one of the great rings. See, it's not only Sauron's ring. Go back to, where is it? Opposite the copyright page, 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne. Okay? So 3 and 7 is 10, and 9 is 19, and 1 is 20. There are 20 great rings, or were 20 great rings. There is only one ring to rule them all. All right? So, the great rings, they were perilous. Immortal Frodo, who keeps one of the great rings, does not die. In other words, it confers one of those things, we didn't talk about this, that Tolkien discusses in his essay on fairy stories as being probably the greatest thing we would like to escape from: death. Harry Potter's nemesis in those novels is named what? His greatest enemy. Lord Voldemort, if you want to pronounce it French-wise, or Lord Voldemort. What does Voldemort/Voldemort mean? Fly from death, or flee from death. He's afraid to die. He's afraid to die more than anything in the world, which is why he goes to great lengths not to die. Okay? You'll see when we get to that. My argument for the entire Harry Potter novels, it's a book I haven't written, it's in my mind, but I'm too lazy to write it, is the 7 novels are about one thing: how to die well. The good death. And we kind of think, what the hell are you talking about? How is death good? There can be good death, and there can be bad death. There can be really bad death, okay? So, he doesn't die, Frodo, but he does not grow or obtain more life. In other words, the ring, in one sense, kind of is like an Energizer battery. It just lets you keep going. How many of you have been awake for 24 hours at a time? 36. 48. Okay. Military, right? Yeah.
No.
I'm confusing you with a student in my.
I mean, that's
Tuesday,
gonna
Thursday.
happen later down the line, but not yet.
Okay.
That was self-inflicted.
Okay. Grew up in California. Did most of my college, undergraduate, outside Chattanooga. And so when, semester would end, I would drive from Chattanooga to San Jose, California, Silicon Valley. And I would do it in one drive.
Oh.
No sleep. About 2,500 miles. It's a lot of coke, no. And no dose. So when I would arrive, I'd be so jacked up, Okay? Tolkien kind of implies that. Notice, it doesn't make life better. It doesn't make life richer. It just keeps going. I think you were saying earlier, before class began, today's the second day of class. It's the second day of the first week of class. How many of you, and it's fine if you don't, how many of you feel like we've been here longer? Man, I sure as hell do.
I feel like I still have no idea what's going on. And I'm a junior. And I am so confused in most of my classes. I have no idea what's going on.
This is my 29th year, and this is literally, because this is the first time I've had to teach one of these, this is literally like starting over from scratch. Because I'm literally kind of having to learn how to breathe and talk at the same time with this. Because you might think, he's just crazy. Try talking for an hour or 2 hours at a time without a pause, wearing a mask. It's not easy, okay?
I've been singing this at rehearsals a week. In 3 hours.
I said something to my daughter yesterday about, yeah, but you guys, the ICU nurse, I said, yeah, but you guys aren't talking all. She goes, oh, yes, we are. Yes, we are, Okay, so he says, and if he merely continues until at last, every minute is a weariness. Most of you are probably, you might have seen it in reruns and stuff, but you're too young to remember XFiles when it was on originally. There was an episode of the XFiles that dealt with an immortal. Okay? It was one of their better ones. And this was a guy who, keeps showing up in newspaper clippings and things like that. Anyways, he meets agents Mulder and Scully, because if he ate them, that would be another episode of dealt with cannibalism. He meets Mulder and Scully, or Mulling and Sculder, whichever it is, and, he talks with them, and what he really wants is to die. And there's only one way he can die. I honestly, I don't remember the end of the episode, and I don't remember if Mulder helps him on his way. But it's like, I just keep going. And he's thousands of years old. And he talks about his various wives and families over the years, and all of his friends and children and grandchildren and dying. And he keeps going on. And he just wants to stop. Okay? That's what Tolkien's getting at here. If he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes, in the end, invisible permanently and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yes, sooner or later, notice the little caveat here, later, if he is strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last. You could have all the best intentions in the world, Gandalf says. Sooner or later, the dark power will devour it. Frodo, how terrifying. Okay. How long have you known all this? Frodo says. How much did Bilbo know? Notice, Gandalf takes the second question first. Bilbo didn't know any more than he told you. Okay? And he says a bit more other stuff. And Frodo says, I don't use it much. I keep it on a chain. Gandalf says, that's good. That's wise. When Bilbo left, he said he was thin and stretched. He uses the metaphor of too little butter on a piece of toast. Okay? A sign that the ring was getting control. Frodo asks again, how long have you known all this? Gandalf, known? I have known much that only the wise know, Frodo. That's a put down. Gandalf saying, who the hell do you think you are? Asking me that kind of question. Well, who does Frodo think Gandalf is? Or put it another way, what does Frodo think Gandalf is? What's he known for in the Shire? Fireworks, man. He does totally cool fireworks. Woo. But notice, I have known much that only the, and it's capitalized, the wise know. But if you mean known about this ring, well, I don't really know. He says there's one test. Okay. When did I begin to guess? Let's see. Year that the White Council drove the Dark Tower from Mirkwood. When was that? In The Hobbit. Over 60 years ago. Okay. He mentions Saruman the White. Okay. And they keep talking. We're going to skip a bunch. Gandalf says, Sauron would love to make slaves of hobbits. And Frodo doesn't understand why. Almost the exact middle of page 49. And hobbits as miserable slaves would please him far more than hobbits happy and free. There is such a thing as malice and revenge. What's malice? Intended evil, where you want to inflict harm or pain for no other reason than that you can. Okay? And Frodo's like, revenge? I haven't done anything against him. When did I do anything bad about Sauron or against Sauron? It's not like I'm putting Sauron with an X through his name and a circle on, carving it on trees and stuff. Okay? What does this have to do with Bilbo, myself, our ring? He says it has everything. Give me the ring. Notice the sentence doesn't stop there. He doesn't say, give me the ring, Frodo. Because that could mean what? I want it. He says, give me the ring for a moment. What did Bilbo offer? Here, you take the ring and give it. No. You just put it over there. Because that's an offer of taking the ring. Okay? So he says, give it to me for a moment. He holds it up, says, you see anything? See any writing? No. Plain. And Gandalf throws it in Frodo's fire. Okay? And Frodo's like, my ring. Gandalf takes it out of the fire with tongs. He says, put your hand out. I don't know if you've ever burned yourself. 3rd degree burn on my leg when I was a little kid. Not fun. But even something out of a fire, metal, you'd kind of go, no. But Frodo does. He trusts Gandalf. And he sees now the fiery letters. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. And he then recites the whole poem. And he says, this is it, Frodo. This is the one ring. This is the ring that controls all the other rings. This is the ring Sauron lost many ages ago to the great weakening of his power. He must not get it. How? How on earth did it come to me? It's kind of interesting that Frodo says, how on earth, because they don't call the ball they live on Earth. Okay. So, Gandalf says, that's a long story. We don't have time for that. Says, but I told you a little bit about Sauron. Frodo. I know we only got 2 minutes. I wish it need not have happened in my time. What does that really mean? I wish I didn't have to deal with this. I always use this example because I think it's a perfect example. You may not. You may think, oh, just some crazy putting politics in. Imagine being George W. Bush, September 11th, 2001, reading My Pet Goat or whatever it was to that group of kindergartners in Jacksonville, Florida. And your chief of staff, Andy Card, comes and whispers in your ear, Mr. President, we are under attack. 2 planes have flown into the World Trade Center. And you've got a group of 20 or 25 5-year-olds in front of you. You can't go, Go back, I think it's on YouTube. You can go back and look at the video of that and watch Bush's eyes. They just kind of go, crap. Why? Because I think at that moment he's immediately thinking, why didn't this happen under Clinton? Why me? It did happen under Clinton, right? Everybody remember? You weren't born. 1993, the first World Trade Center towers bombing. When they tried to take him down with a van loaded with explosives in the parking garage underneath. Okay? Gandalf, so do I, and so do all who live to see such times. Of course you don't want it to happen in your day, but that's not for them to decide. And this is going to give me, nope, it already stopped recording. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. We'll stop there. We'll pick up with that on today's Wednesday, Friday.